Welcome to Constant Variables, a podcast where we take a non-technical look at building and growing digital products. I'm Tim Bornholdt. Let's get nerdy.
This episode is sponsored by the Mahonis Group. We're a team of skilled iOS, Android, and Rails developers who love partnering with enterprises who need help with things like code maintenance, server management, QA, and more. You can learn more about our services and a price breakdown of each by visiting our website. We've found that being transparent about all aspects of building technology, including the costs, makes the process a whole lot simpler. So visit jmg.mn to take a look. And while you're listening to Tim's conversation with Paul Johansen, please take a second to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. We're going for an algorithm play here. The more reviews we have, the more will show up in Apple's search results. So help us out with a rating and review, and we'll thank you with a shout out on the show. Visit constantvariables.co/review, and we'll take you right there.
Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
Well, I'd love for you to take a chance to introduce yourself and your role over at Edmentum.
Sure. My name is Paul Johansen. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Edmentum. We are a provider of K through 12, or of curriculum and assessments directly to K through 12 districts throughout the United States. So we serve about 8,000 districts in all 50 states, US-wide. My team has the pleasure of really leading up the technology aspect of our operations at Edmentum. So when you think about Edmentum and what we do, it's almost like we're two businesses brought together. We are first and foremost an education company that is a education publisher of great educational material. So, things like courses and assessments, but we bring that educational material to our students and our teachers through technology. So we're also kind of an education publisher coupled with a software as a service business. So when you think of it that way, my team is primarily in charge of all the things that go with the software as a service business. So whether it's, the uptime and reliability of our products, the software development that's associated with the products, kind of the innovation around data science, data analytics that goes with our products, all those pieces kind of fall within my purview at Edmentum as we bring our solutions out to schools across the country.
I'm sure it's quite a complex thing to cover because you've got 50 different states with 50 different ways of doing education, even though I know there's federal laws and everything too that kind of mandate that, but I would imagine it's a lot to keep track of on your end.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Everything from the technical aspects of kind of riding the wave of time zones across the U.S., right? The usage of our products is driven heavily by the school day, and so you get things starting early as the East Coast comes on, and things staying late as the West Coast finishes up, and then of course students will work on very different timelines than a lot of us, and so we get these kind of interesting surges in the middle of the night, and so there's things that that happen from that perspective. But then also, like you said, there's 50 different states that have different educational standards, different ways that they want to approach teaching different subject areas, even different subject areas that they teach. And so there's a lot of customization, configuration within our products to really accommodate this wide variety of stakeholders that we serve.
Absolutely. You've been with Edmentum for over a decade. I mean, starting back when they were mailing DVDs, and obviously EdTech has evolved since then. I mean, I've been out of high school for almost like 15 years now, and I just looking back at technology, I have a kindergartner now and see what they're doing compared to what we were doing. I mean, things are rapidly changing, and then all of a sudden a pandemic hits, and that probably further accelerates the need for continuing to improve it. So I'm curious to hear how Edmentum is continuing to innovate while sustaining, everything that's going on around us in this world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the most challenging aspects I think that you'll see at really any software company, but certainly one that's in the, an industry like education, right, that is sometimes challenged to change the status quo, except for when things like a pandemic hit, and it really kind of pushes that along. And so, from our perspective, we have a mantra, kind of an internal mantra that we call Educator-First. And what that really boils down to is listening to what our educators and our teachers have to say, essentially listening to what the market has to say. And so there's a lot that we have to do for continual improvement on our products, for just kind of keeping them moving along. The promise of software as a service, the promise of having a subscription product is continually improving and adding new features, making it easier to use, all of those great things. And so we continue to move those things along at a consistent pace. But like you said, kind of how you inject innovation into that can be tricky. It can be challenging, but the way we do that is really listening to the market, right? And I think innovation happens when we hear a problem and we think about it in terms of, well, no one's actually solved that problem yet, or there isn't a really apparent solution available to that problem. So there's certain things in our roadmap right now where we know that none of our competitors, no one else in the market has really solved this. We're not exactly sure how we're going to solve it ourselves, but that's where we really focus on applying innovation, working through different processes to come up with solutions, and really, try different ways of thinking about it to be able to do that. And so I think it's constantly that balance, but really I think innovation is driven through listening to the problems that you're trying to solve clearly from your customers or from our customer base, and trying to apply solutions to those in ways that might not be the traditional ways to solve it.
It's funny. I think a lot of times people think innovation happens with your, sitting in a white room. I mean, it's kind of like the Johnny Ive of Apple approach of like, you're sitting in this white room and you're just kind of like getting a whole view of the world while you're meditating. And then all of a sudden inspiration strikes. And it's like, I don't think that's usually how it works out. Usually it's more of like what you're saying. It's like a lot more of you're listening to your customers, and the fact that you're putting educators first is interesting, as opposed to like students or parents or administrators. It's like hearing it from the teachers themselves. They're kind of already the person that has to deal with like parents on one side and administration on the other, and then actually facilitating this information to the kids. Using their insight and what they're already tackling. It's like you can just sit and listen to a teacher talk for a half hour. I'm sure you've got your roadmap covered for the next 5 years of what to add in.
Yeah, teachers are definitely not shy about what they need and what they're trying to solve. And so they are absolutely fantastic at providing that level of feedback, but they also see problems kind of from a different light, right, in terms of how they look at it. And we do talk about educator first, right, as kind of our mantra. And you said, we have multiple sets of stakeholders, multiple sets of groups that we're worried about, whether it's administrators, students, of course, parents, and especially with the pandemic, kind of the role of the parent in education has evolved and been magnified even more. But nothing, we still firmly believe that nothing replaces this connection between a student and a teacher at this point. The technology is just not there to replace that. And so our goal is to provide the students with great curriculum, with all the great resources they need, and provide educators with the time and the tools to really continue to enhance their ability to connect with those students. And so that's why we tend to focus on the educators, is we firmly believe that teachers are the ones that are continuing to change the world, continuing to inspire students, and that the resources that we provide are great tools for both the students and the teachers, but amplifying that connection is absolutely the best thing we can do.
On the same vein, I mean, we've talked about how you have multiple stakeholders, and it's like we kind of you index towards the educators, but at the same time, the administrators cut the checks and the students use the products. So it's like you kind of have to figure out this like delicate dance of how you get everybody's feedback in and mix it all together. So I'm curious to hear what you think about or how you go about balancing out all of the different voices, along with obviously having the teachers and the educators being the focal point.
Yeah, I mean, it is a constant battle to ensure that we get everybody represented. And so again, I think it really comes down to listening to all those different voices, ensuring they're all at the table. Whenever we put out a new feature, or if we're bringing a new solution to one of our products, we spend an extensive amount of time out in the market listening to all stakeholders, right? So when we go do testing of user concepts, we don't just test those user concepts with the teachers. We'll work with them, with customers of our products who are teachers, with teachers who are not customers of our products. We work with students, we work with the administrators, we work with parents on features that we develop for parents. So it really is getting that voice of the market brought into it. And that creates that buy-in, not only amongst those who are using our products, but right, when you think about buy-in, we also have to get buy-in that this is the right area to invest in, and get buy-in that this is the right features to roll out. So there's kind of that internal buy-in aspect of it as well. And having, obviously there's things like business cases and pieces that go around it, but also having that true voice and feedback from the market, from our end users, is really critical for having that buy-in of, even though we're maybe approaching this in a different way than other people have approached it before, if we're approaching it in a way that hasn't been done before, here's the evidence, trying to take, like you said, kind of something that is this innovation is viewed as this concept that is not, maybe necessarily super founded in data or process, but essentially still building an evidence case behind that this innovation that we're working on, even though it may be different than how we've looked at it before, we have the data that shows us that this is going to have the impact that we need.
Yeah, I often think about, and I ask this question of a lot of our guests, I think about how you keep all of these stakeholders happy. And it is like this balance that there's never a perfect fit or a right answer. And some organizations have different approaches of how they approach it. And I just think it's a really interesting line of conversation, at least, is to try to think through how that works out. And I can't really think of other ways to do it other than the way that you said, of just actually getting out and talking to people and collecting that feedback and trying to make sure, you're not going to make everybody happy all of the time, but doing the best you can to get everybody at least something they need, and make sure that you're not hurting anybody actively in the process as well. It's just it's a never ending struggle. And I'm always just endlessly fascinated with how different people approach that topic.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting. So the way, when you look at product management, right, who tends to be the advocates for a product or the advocates for certain aspects of a product traditionally, and it's the way that we're organized as well, right? You typically organize your product management around your products, around the products you're actually bringing to market, that you're selling to the market. I've heard of some companies, and there's a local one here that's also an ed tech that does this, where they've actually organized their product management team around personas, right? So they have a product management team for students, they have a product management team for teachers, a product management team for administrators. So instead of, our different products are, courses and ExactPath and Study Island, and that's how we organize product management, they're actually organizing around the personas to make sure that those stakeholders have that level of kind of advocacy within the organization to do it. And so I think, that's always kind of intrigued me as well, in terms of some of the, some of the different ways you can think about it. Because I agree, there's a million different ways to think about that and accomplish it. And every organization has their slightly different flavor, but some have taken kind of much more, abstract approaches to doing that, and it's and they seem very successful for them as well. So I think there's a lot of benefit to talking through all the different types of opportunities there.
I love that concept. I don't think I've ever heard of that before, of organizing around personas, but that really does make a lot of sense from at least making sure you're capturing that voice. I think it probably would get a little confusing if you're having multiple teams impacting a single product or something, but it's at the very least, it's a concept worth exploring. I have to dig into that some more.
Yeah. I think it's like any of those, right? You optimize around one problem and then you sub-optimize other problems. So I guess it's, it doesn't make everything perfect, right? But it's certainly, when you think about advocating for that specific group of users, it definitely puts that at the top of where you're optimizing.
100%. So I was mentioning before, it's been 15 years since I've been in high school, and I remember still like having to plug into an Ethernet jack and getting rejected from one of our teachers for trying to get another switch so we could have more than one computer on the internet at once. So I think technology has definitely evolved as time has gone on. One thing I'm curious about, and I always bring this up on when we interview guests, is privacy and customer data, and being that you're working with students from the whole range of spectrum, there's kicking up a lot of data for these kids, and I'm curious to hear how you integrate emerging technologies. We haven't really touched things like AI and AR, but these things are starting to become more common in classrooms. So I'm curious how you guys think about integrating these emerging technologies while also protecting the students' data.
Yeah, no, it is. It is a great topic, and one that's certainly, over the past, like you said, I've been here for 12 years, and um, it was a conversation, even more than 5 years ago, that wasn't had a lot in terms of privacy, but today it is everywhere, and it's super important. And I'm glad that there is, more understanding of it, and understanding of the importance of it. So it's something we talk about a lot, and it is consistently a balance, right? Because in order to continue to improve your products, in order to build some of these innovative solutions, especially those that depend on things like machine learning and AI to be able to put in place, it does require a lot of data. So there are certainly, you know, we've had a lot of advances from even from a legal perspective, which is fantastic to really ensure that students' data is held private. So, California with the California Consumer Protection Act, the CCPA has a lot in it that impacts the education industry, that really has set a framework. Other states are coming out with legislation as well that's really important. And so from our perspective, we want to be, far more progressive than just complying with the law. And so we're very straightforward about how we use that data. We only use it in order to serve that student's educational needs or to improve the educational aspects of our products. We're very explicit about that. We have a privacy policy that lays out exactly how we use the data, the specific data that's collected. There are a lot of industry groups that are doing really good work as well. And so there's a student privacy pledge that most providers in the industry have signed on to that puts in place some really basic but really good, important ethical obligations of what we're doing with that data, how we're treating a student's data, to really just ensure that, for all of us, certainly for Edmentum, but for all of us in the industry, we are there to be partners for the school districts and to serve those school districts as best we can. So ensuring that we can provide the districts the assurance that, that their data is safe, that, they have to be very concerned about that data as well. And for us to act as an agent for them with that data, just being able to ensure that privacy and ethical responsibility is super important.
I like something you said immediately was that you like having this conversation around privacy. And I don't know too many technologists who don't like this conversation, but there's certainly a lot of stakeholders in technology that don't like to talk about this stuff. It's interesting to me how we, being a nerd, I've seen this stuff my whole life, and I know how all of it works. And you understand how Facebook is a multi-billion-dollar company, and all these other companies make all their money is they do some not great things with people's data. So it's interesting to me. Like, it just kind of made me chuckle, thinking like, technologists are like, yes, we've been wanting this conversation to happen for years, and it's only been over the last few years that people all of a sudden are understanding like, oh, we really do need to take this seriously and not just kind of collect information for the sake of collecting it. It's like, no, we got to have an actual purpose for this data, and then feed that back into actually providing value back to the students and the faculty and everybody else involved.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is. It's great that we're having a more, for lack of a better term, I guess, enlightened conversation around it, and that, everybody's knowledge and understanding of it is increasing, because it's critically important, as we move education forward in that way.
100% agreed. What are you seeing as some of the more promising technologies on the horizon for education today?
Yeah, certainly it really comes down to, I think, what we're seeing that's very promising. So I guess maybe I can put them in a couple of different categories. So some of the things that are really promising in terms of very actionable happening right now is this ability for, technology to be able to take these large amounts of data, be able to pull them together, find patterns, and present that back to a teacher, right? Because a teacher in front of the classroom with 30 different students, has a set of information that they understand and that they can learn about those students. But there's so many different aspects coming in of data from that student. How did they maybe do in the next class that teacher doesn't have? What are the different aspects of where they're struggling, where they're spending more time, the patterns of the type of questions that they can answer or are struggling with, to just, again, be able to provide that educator more insight, more understanding of where they may be able to spend time with that student, or even better, here's a group of students that you could pull together and use this type of lesson that could be most effective. So again, kind of finding these shortcuts, finding these optimizations in a teacher's day for how they can use their time. Also being able to do that with students as well, right? Suggesting the right materials for students, suggesting the right next piece of curriculum that's going to be most important. Some of the most powerful things that our products do, and that their products in the industry overall continue to evolve, is to take the results. Right? We hear a lot about testing and state testing and over testing kids, and all of that is very real. But when you can take that and actually be actionable against it in a very meaningful way, you can make that assessment time more valuable, more meaningful for the student, because you can drive specific learning activities out of what those assessments do, right? Those assessments are crafted, whether it's Edmentum assessments or other assessments, reliable, well-crafted assessments can provide you a really, really strong set of information about where that student is, so that you can be very predictive and prescriptive about what that student will need next, and being able to use that to create individualized learning paths for students in a very adaptive way is extremely powerful as well. So, every student is kind of following their classroom teacher of what's happening during the day, of what topics they're learning, but the type of materials that they're provided to learn that topic, or the type of materials they're provided to maybe learn things that they're, struggling with, that they're behind on, or things that where we need students to be able to accelerate them forward because they're understanding these concepts at a faster rate. So there's, all of those pieces of just finding the right resources for the right student at the right time is where I think there's just a ton of possibilities.
It sounds really exciting, because you would think that the best approach would be to have a guidance counselor or somebody that's overseeing each student individually and walking them along the way. And of course, that's not labor wise, just one thing, but it's just it's not feasible to have somebody walking with the student every single class. So doing that with technology and especially with AI, the cool thing with AI is it finds patterns, that sometimes we as humans don't find. And it's, whether that's good or bad, it's interesting. It's new data, and it's all about finding ways to help students learn more efficiently, or at least find how they learn and maybe adapt their technique for learning. You can take this data and say, oh, they learn better with, doing experiments as opposed to watching Bill Nye, or, that dates me. But you know what I mean? I think, though. Yeah. I think that's fascinating though. That's where we're kind of going, is having a more personalized care to students and catering the experience to how they learn best.
That's right. Yeah. Because that's the key, right? You talk about engagement a lot for students, and a lot of times people will kind of equate engagement to gamification, right? Or making learning, feel like, some game that you're playing, Fortnite or others. But it's engagement is also making sure that student just has the right material, that is something that they're ready to learn, that they can kind of sink their teeth into and learn, and presenting it in a way that they learn best, right? That alone can create huge amounts of engagement to keep students motivated and moving forward, right? Outside of other extrinsic, tactics around, motivation principles, gamification, all of those pieces as well.
Definitely. I mean, I was actually talking about this today with somebody else, and it happened to be coincidental that I'm chatting with you right now. But I was thinking back when I was in college, I remember a professor saying that there have been studies that have been, done basically since universities were formed, that doing large scale lecture type of disseminating information just doesn't work. It works to a certain degree, but to have somebody sitting still for an hour and then afterwards asking them what they learned, they retain, like small percentages of that information. And it's just always, as when I heard that, it just struck me like, then why are we still doing it? Like it was when I was in college, that was like, around 2010. And it's like, we've known this for a decade now, yet this is still the preferred way of doing it. Now, when you throw in a global pandemic, which makes those old kind of stodgy, rooted in ways infeasible or impossible, now we have to turn to technology to have new ways of learning and gathering information. So I don't know if I really am leading towards a question on this, more of an observation and just hearing your thoughts around that. Like, do you see like acceleration from the pandemic causing there to be new ways of learning, or are we, effectively taking these ways that we know don't work and trying to digitize them?
Yeah, well, no, that's your last comment is really what popped into my head initially. Is unfortunately, right, a lot of what happened in the pandemic was taking old familiar concepts. I shouldn't say a lot. Many times, the cases where you've heard where the learning really didn't go well, it was taking these existing older concepts and trying to apply them to the pandemic, right? So instead of lecturing to a whole group of people, you're recording, kind of a plain talking head video of doing this, or someone standing in front of a whiteboard, right? And so you're replicating that same experience. And it's even worse because it's just one way, right? A student can't raise their hand and ask for clarification and those kind of things. Or you're just taking a textbook and you're digitizing it and you're reading that textbook, right? You're not getting the advantages. You're getting the advantages of scale from a technology perspective, but you're not getting the advantages of truly digital learning, right? Where you have digital-first providers like Edmentum or other providers in the industry, right? We're designing our curriculum around a digital experience, right? Where it's sure there maybe is 2 or 3 minute videos or 4 or 5 minute videos mixed in, but then it's moving a student to a different activity to apply that, and it's moving a student to a game to practice it or other things, right? So you're kind of, using this different pedagogical design or pedagogical approach that is more appropriate for student-led digital learning than it is trying to take these existing concepts. And unfortunately, a lot of what we saw happen during the pandemic was because of a lack of time, because of a lack of resources, because of a lack of training, a lot of existing concepts were just attempted to be applied online. But there were also many, many places where it truly opened up new ways of looking at it, new ways of thinking about it, how teachers, there's so many great stories of how teachers curated different resources together and kind of created their own structure, right, where they were maybe doing some live lecture and then mixing in other activities. Teachers are incredibly resourceful and innovative and did some great things there as well. So there are, while there were many cases of kind of just reapplying the old, there were also many, many cases of new ways of thinking. And we strongly feel that it moved the whole industry forward in ways that just, I'm not sure how it otherwise would have happened, right? So many teachers became virtual teachers, understood how technology can be used at scale and how it can be used effectively at scale, that it really kind of moved the industry and just retaught a lot of districts how education can be. And we're seeing, obviously, as we went into this year, we thought it was going to kind of go back to being more normal from the pandemic perspective. Obviously, unfortunately, what we've seen is, a lot of different closures and things happening. But even when we get back to a kind of a more normalized state where COVID isn't, or the pandemic isn't affecting how we're doing school, we are sure that we are going to see a higher use of technology, a higher offering of virtual education, just because of the successes and the understanding that the industry now has compared to what it used to have even just 3 years ago.
Yeah, I think when I was giving that example of me being a student and hating to be sitting in a lecture hall, I honestly believe teachers don't like that either.
Right.
So it's kind of just like, whether it's just a fear from faculty or administration or whoever to change those ways. I think at the very least, like you said, this pandemic has really accelerated that maybe entrepreneurial spirit of teachers, or just that willingness to try new things and shake it up. And, teachers want the same thing, right? Like they want the students to learn, and they want to be able to get that feedback. And just throwing a video up online is cool, but is that actually the most useful way way and productive way of teaching somebody? Probably not. So having the ability to swap in and try new things and switch it up is like it really feels like a dawning of a new era for ed tech, of being able to, now that you kind of were forced to see the benefits. Of course there were downsides, but being able to see the benefits of what distance learning and virtual learning can bring, it's like, okay, now we've got something here. We're in 2021 and doing 2021 things. Why don't we try doing it this way, or throw in this thing, or switch it up? It's like it seems like a really exciting time, at least, to be in this space.
Yeah, it is. You're absolutely right. I've always felt it's exciting. I guess that's why I've been here for a long time. But this is like nothing else that I've ever seen in terms of the excitement, what we're able to do, the willingness of the education market to change and accept these different ways of doing things. So it is an incredibly, these next several years, especially as there's continues to be good federal funding coming into the schools to allow them to fund really important things from infrastructure, that students have more access to devices, have more access to high-speed internet than they've ever had before because of the funding that's come into play, and also the funding to invest in innovation and finding training and professional development around these new ways of doing things. And so there's a lot of support, not only from kind of just the mindset perspective, but there's truly some resource support that federal and state governments that are providing that's above and beyond what the education industry has seen as well, which will certainly help move it forward as well.
That's a really great point to make too. I mean, we've talked about the digital divide on this podcast and about all the different ways that, it's hard to educate people, especially with all the technologies we have, when there's no funding to help support some of that growth. And it's, I'm not good at saying, where the funding should come from or anything, but other than the fact, just to point out that if you ever step foot in most schools and try to get on their Wi-Fi and run speed tests, you would be very surprised to know most buildings aren't well equipped with high-speed internet, and especially as you get more rural, out into the rural areas. But even in the inner city, it's like I know in Minneapolis I've seen some schools recently where it's like, well, we lost our line to CenturyLink today, so school's down for the day. Like, can't get anything done. It's like these infrastructure things are super important when it comes to education, and it is, like you said, it's really great to see that we actually are investing in these these infrastructure upgrades, so that we're not running T1 lines or anything like super slow into schools anymore. It's like we're modernizing, we're getting faster, we're utilizing technology to the greatest extent we can.
Yeah, I would imagine, right? Probably for a lot of the listeners on this call, and certainly from my perspective, like, you just take for granted that access to technology. You take for granted that access to fairly reliable, we all get mad when our cable provider goes down for a couple hours, but pretty reliable access, where you're exactly right that you get into urban areas or, rural areas, it isn't there. And a lot of, what students have at home or what their parents have at home for technology is a cell phone that's connected to the internet through that cell phone provider, right? They may not have a laptop and a computer and other aspects, or even Wi-Fi in the house. And so it's being able to provide that was, a huge challenge during the pandemic, and certainly getting better. But that is where we'll continue to make real strides for, equitable access to all of these resources for everyone.
Oh yeah, definitely. So your engineering team is spread pretty wide, right? Like you're not all located in one space. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's right. We span from the Pacific time zone all the way to the Bulgaria time zone. So we stretch across. Yeah, we have primary offices in down in Bloomington, and then in Dallas and Seattle here in the U.S., and then about 2 hours north of London in the U.K. And then we partner with a firm out of Bulgaria as well for team members there. So we kind of have some centers, I would say, at least pre-pandemic, where we were more centralized. We've always supported kind of remote developers in a lot of different locations, even before the pandemic, but certainly now, when we look for team members, we really aren't focused on getting somebody into an office. We're focused on getting the best person that can, help us move our mission forward.
That's awesome. I mean, the pandemic definitely did accelerate that remote working thing, but once you have the system in place, since you're already so spread out, I would imagine, you've started with this remote talent pool, and now you've got a lot of people kind of fishing in that same pool. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear what challenges you've been overcoming by having a dispersed team, and then also some of the advantages of being spread out so wide and far.
Yeah, I mean, some of the advantages, that we didn't necessarily anticipate, especially as we went into the pandemic, was it really did level the playing field, right? So we would have, we had teams that came into the office every day in Minneapolis and Dallas and in the UK. And a lot of things were solved kind of within the context of that team, hallway conversations, or maybe, stand-up meetings that were happening there. And so there were a lot of things that maybe a team in Dallas, didn't necessarily hear about, not because anybody was trying to hide anything. It just wasn't kind of top of mind. But one of the advantages we certainly saw was that, hey, if you're going to grab 6 people together that were on a Minneapolis team, there's no more effort to pass on that Zoom meeting to 2 people in Dallas and 1 person in the UK. Or if you're going to send out, if you're taking notes and sending them out, there's no reason that can't just send them to those team members. And so it really helped kind of level the playing field and ensuring that we didn't have kind of silos of work happening where communication wasn't getting out. So that was one of the advantages, kind of pleasant surprises that we saw. But on the other hand, right, I mean, it does certainly make some of the, especially when you think about the planning sessions, getting people together to do planning, it makes a lot of those more challenging. So you have to, surprisingly exhausting to sit on a Zoom meeting for 8 hours to do planning, as compared to, right, being in a conference room where you can get up and use the whiteboard and take breaks and and chat with colleagues. So you just had to be much more intentional about how you're going to make those sessions engaging, how you're going to replicate some of the value of when we did face to face. And so I think that's certainly been the bigger challenges, kind of the bigger planning events, the bigger problem solving events, where we would typically, even those would be the occasions where we would say, like, hey, let's just fly everybody in, let's lock people in a room for 2 or 3 days, and let's go figure out what the next version of reporting for this product is going to be, or whatever it might be. And so those things that we would defer to, hey, this is a hard problem, let's get together, trying to figure out, this is a hard problem, how are we going to do this, right? And so typically tactics like, instead of, hey, we're going to have 3 or 4 days of full sessions, we're going to take a whole bunch of different half days or a whole bunch of different 2 to 3 hour sessions, and be very specific about who we're having there and how we're going to engage them to be able to do it. So a lot of it was kind of doing the same activities, but maybe slicing them up in different ways, maybe being intentional about how you do breakout groups to kind of create these smaller group conversations that would otherwise maybe more naturally happen in person. And so it's a lot less about the technology and, hey, how do you use Zoom, and a lot more about thinking about how would people interact in a different way and trying to replicate that, or where we can even improve on it possibly.
Yeah, I think one technique I'm curious is if you use pair programming, and for those who, this is supposed to be a non-technical show, so I sometimes want to explain something. So
Sure.
Usually pair programming is when you have 2 people basically sitting around one computer and working through a problem together. You're literally talking through and solving a problem, so you both are on the same page with whatever it is you're trying to solve. And I've seen a lot of remote first companies use this to great effect of having a programmer. If you have someone in Bulgaria, right? You said Bulgaria, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, you get somebody in Bulgaria, somebody in San Francisco, you kind of find a time for them to get together, and you have a problem and you work together to solve it. And then that way the knowledge of how that works isn't just localized to one office or one area, but it's then now 2 people have got it, and you can kind of help, disseminate that throughout your organization. Do you guys do a lot of pair programming?
We don't. Well, it depends on, so there's like kind of this very formal definition of pair programming around, like always. We don't do, that aspect, but we do a ton of pair programming, whether it's onboarding someone, like you said, learning, doing knowledge transfer to ensure that other that all the knowledge isn't kind of locked up in one person's head. And so there's a lot of different, that's where these collaboration tools do such a great job, whether it's the tools we use to kind of check in our source code. Those tools have great kind of collaboration aspects built into them that allow you to engage other team members kind of in an asynchronous manner, and then certainly using tools like Teams or Zoom or Slack to be able to just kind of seamlessly or less formally say like, hey, can you hop on here, take a look at this with me, or I want to show you how this is working. Some of the values we have as a team are really being openly sharing information and openly asking for feedback is a critical part of how we want our teams to act and what we want to do. And so we try to really embed that into the way that people work.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard with that feedback side of things because, it's one thing when you can kind of deliver a compliment sandwich or whatever they call it in person. It's easy to kind of give that feedback of, hey, you did this thing great. Now, maybe here's the thing that I actually wanted to talk to you about and you change that. But then here's this other thing you're doing great. And there you go, compliment sandwich. That's easy to serve that up in person and you can kind of feel it out. But virtually, it kind of makes it harder to do those sorts of things. And especially when you want to deliver, without putting sandwiching it with compliments, if you just want to deliver hey, you should try doing it this way or that way, it's so hard to infer context. And, you kind of have to train that into your team, I would imagine, of here's, how to give good feedback. And then also here's how to receive good feedback in an asynchronous and virtual, manner.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, that is 100% an area that we're investing in as a company. So literally the things you just mentioned, we have our talent and human resource team works really hard to provide formalized training on doing those things. And it almost sounds silly to say like to give and receive feedback that you need training on that, but it really is super important, especially with not necessarily being able to do that face to face, understanding the context of that we're always going to have remote team members there, and it brings a whole different way of doing that. So we, internally we have tracks that we do that. We engage outside team members. So, one of our great partners is Matt Norman at Dale Carnegie. I'm not sure if you know him, but we work with Matt Norman a lot on helping teams in all situations, virtual and not, do things like leading through influence and how getting their ideas across and those kind of things, and feedback ultimately becomes a part of that as well. So we invest both heavily internally in terms of time spent, as well as externally bringing in outside resources who are experts in this to help us move that forward as an organization, because it's so important. And if you overlook those aspects, this transition to a fully remote team and not wanting to lose productivity or wanting to gain productivity as part of that, it just all of those little pieces that are more the soft skills or the non kind of core technology parts of your job becomes so important to emphasize.
Yeah, I didn't, when you said that it might sound weird to get training on those things, it's honestly surprising me, since we're talking about ed tech, that's not something that's more commonly taught in schools from day one. I mean, especially when you're talking about a remote first culture, the way that we in the Twin Cities give and receive feedback is vastly different to the way that you would give and receive feedback in a downtown Manhattan, Wall Street environment, whereas we might try to spend 20 minutes making you feel good about what you're doing wrong, and then passively aggressively tell you something.
Exactly.
Somebody on the West or on the East Coast is going to just walk up to you and say, "Hey, moron, like do it this way," and they value that feedback. And so I think that would probably be something too that you're dealing with actively, is just different cultures have different ways of dealing with this stuff. And so it's not necessarily how, nobody needs to understand how to give and receive feedback feedback around the peers that you're dealing with, because you kind of learn that through culture and through just, living everyday life. But when all of a sudden you're dropped into a room with somebody who lives halfway across the country or across the globe as you, let alone the country, there are ways that if you just level set with each other and say, this is how we're going to give and receive feedback, and it might feel like it's going to hurt feelings, but it won't, and here's why, and just getting people on the same page, I would imagine there's tremendous benefits for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, that's why it's really important whenever we do any of these trainings, we try to create kind of this wide representative group to go through it together, right? So we're not just taking like the Seattle group and saying you do the training together, and then the Minneapolis group and saying you do it together. We do intentionally always mix and match those, right? So you're setting those expectations, you're getting on that same level playing field across all those areas. Because like you said, it's certainly, kind of East Coast versus, Midwest kind of approach to things are very different. But, also with the Bulgarian teams they're fantastic, and they provide very blunt and very direct feedback. And we absolutely love that. And it's one of the things we appreciate with working with that group. But it can be, it can put you back in your chair a little bit too, if you're not ready for it as a kind of a, more of a laid back, passive aggressive Midwesterner, as many of us are, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've been feeling that over the last few years. We've been getting a more diverse set of clients, and I've always thought, again, being a Midwest born and raised, that those jerks on the East Coast and they're so blunt and whatever. But then the more I've been in business and dealing with different kinds of people, it's like getting that feedback. As long as you have a relationship and it's coming from a spirit of growth and a positive place of like, hey, we're just trying to make this better. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm just trying to get you what you need to know. It does really shave a lot of time off from what I'm used to.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an overused term a little bit, I think. But this concept of psychological safety, like you said, if you know that it's coming from the right place, if you know it's in the spirit of advancing the solution or moving forward the work that you're doing, that sets the foundation, right? That you're creating that safe way for these team members to working together and ensuring that you have common sets of values, common ways of working, common understanding as to how we're going to provide feedback. That's what makes it all possible, right? And that's why, again, kind of looping back to where we started, like having that formal training to talk about how we're going to do that, as kind of out of place as it may sound to some listeners, is so important.
Oh yeah, definitely agreed on that. So, you mentioned also when we were kind of talking at the beginning that you have not only an internal team of engineers, but an outsourcing partner as well. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts around when it makes sense to outsource a project, especially, as a technology company, when do you outsource stuff versus handling it all internally?
Yeah, no, that is the $1 million question, I guess, or probably many $1 million question. I've done a lot of different iterations of offshore development in my years. And the way that we're approaching it now, and where I'm a big fan of, is we ensure that the team members that we're bringing on from an offshore perspective are at the same level as the team members we have here. So I've certainly worked in models, and for some projects and some industries, it's great where you kind of carve off work and say, hey, this is a little easier work, or this is maybe work that doesn't need as much business context or doesn't need as much understanding, and you can provide more maintenance activities to offshore teams, and you can do things in a very cost-effective, quick turnaround manner, and that works great. When the way that we're using this firm is it's both availability of resources in terms of access to another talent pool, because it's hard for all of us to find team members these days, and kind of the flexibility to flex up as we need to add capacity to specific initiatives or specific areas, or to flex down if we're moving capacity to different areas as well. And so when we look at it from that perspective, kind of the key aspects for us is we ensure that those team members go through the same type of rigorous interview process that any onshore team member would, so that what you're getting from the team member in Bulgaria is the same as what you're expecting from a team member in Minneapolis or Dallas. And we fully integrate them onto our team. So we're not kind of outsourcing a project and saying like, hey, go work on this and then come back when it's done. They are part of a sprint team that owns a product, that they participate in daily stand-ups, every part of the ceremonies, they come to our department meetings, they become a member of the team just like anybody else. And for us, that's the model that when we need to ensure that we're providing the level of quality and expectations in our products, that's the model that we've chosen to take on for that work, to provide that flexibility in terms of finding talent and being able to flex up and down from a resourcing model that works extremely well. I mean, the downsides are that you have to spend a lot of time, just like you have to spend a lot of time finding really good talent if you're searching locally to be able to do that. So it's not as easy necessarily as just kind of picking up the phone and saying, hey, give me a couple of people who can work on this project. You have to put in the investment, but in the end, it's worth it. And we have really good tenure, very low turnover with our partners in Bulgaria, just like we do with our onshore teams as well. And I think that's one of the positive aspects that comes out of it. You're not kind of churning through this consistent cycle of new team members and retraining and bringing on additional, having to onboard and bring on additional people all the time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you come at it from a non-technical standpoint and you think like, well, we're just going to outsource and we'll have a team and they'll be spun up, and like in a couple of weeks, they'll be able to start writing code and contributing. And it's like, I've never seen a team that successful like getting people going that quickly. It does take a good investment in understanding, not just the product. The product is one thing, but it's really the culture and all the back stories and everything that comes along with building software and doing it in such a way that, actually provides value. Because developers make a million micro decisions throughout the course of building software. And, if you don't have the proper context for making those decisions, then you're going to start making, 1,000 tiny little paper cuts in your own software that you're going to have to go back and fix later with the right context. So I totally agree with you that there is an investment to be made, but if you find that right partner and both sides are feeling good about it, then that's really a slam dunk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Paul, this has been an awesome conversation. I'd love for you to, just take a chance to shout out anything you'd like to shout out on the show, or direct the audience to come and find you. And if they got any more questions or want to learn more about what you're doing over at Edmentum.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was great to be on here and I really appreciate it. We're always, love having conversations about what we're doing. We're always looking for great team members, whether it's technology or not. So certainly look us up, on all the socials on our website for Edmentum. That's, Edmentum is education and momentum smashed together, kind of one of those brand words that sometimes gets a little confused, but we love what we do. I think what makes Edmentum who we are is the passion that people have for the mission, the passion that people have for education, and how they can take their talents and apply it to something exciting. And so you tend to, if you're interested in learning more, you tend to find people who are certainly excited to talk about what we do and tell our story.
I love it. Well, yeah, hopefully people here can go and check it out, and we hope you pick up a couple of folks to come and work for you. And thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it today.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it as well, the opportunity. It's been great.
Thanks to Paul Johansen for coming on the show today. You can learn more about Edmentum at edmentum.com. Show notes for this episode can be found at constantvariables.co. You can get in touch with us by emailing hello@constantvariables.co, or you can find us on Twitter at CV_podcast. The best place to connect with Tim is on LinkedIn. Today's episode was produced by Jenny Karkowski and edited by the upstanding Jordan Doust. As I mentioned at the start of the episode, if you could take 2 minutes to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, we'll give you a mention in a future episode as a thank you. Visit constantvariables.co/review and we'll link you right there. This episode was brought to you by the Mahonis Group. Check us out at jmg.mn.